There is a quiet fear that follows many people, even when life seems calm on the surface. A fear that someone they love might leave without warning, without reason, without looking back. It lives deep in the body, in the tight chest, in the restless thoughts, in the worry that arrives before anything bad even happens. It is the fear of being abandoned, a fear that often begins long before a person ever learns its name. It shapes how they love, how they trust, and how they see themselves. And even though it feels deeply personal, it is more universal than most people realize. This is a story about that fear, where it comes from, how it works, and how it quietly shapes a human life. It often begins in ordinary moments. A message left unread, a pause that feels a little too long, a shift in someone's tone that may not mean anything at all, but the body reacts anyway. The heart tightens, thoughts speed up, and suddenly, a small silence feels like a sign that something is slipping away. People who carry the fear of abandonment rarely notice its early shape. It does not announce itself loudly. It hides in the small questions they ask themselves every day. Did I say something wrong? Are they upset with me? Did I imagine the distance? Or is it real? It is a quiet panic living beneath the surface of normal life. A person may look calm from the outside, but inside they are scanning for changes, tiny signals, tiny shifts. Anything that might show someone they love is pulling away. It is not dramatic. It is not loud. It is often invisible, even to the person feeling it. Abandonment fear moves like a shadow, not enough to stop a person from living, but always present enough to shape how they move through the world. It creates a sensitivity to rejection, even when no rejection exists. It turns simple moments into emotional puzzles, moments others may shrug off. But for someone carrying this fear, they feel heavy, meaningful, dangerous. And the most painful part is that this fear often feels unreasonable. They know the logic. They know one delayed reply does not equal loss. They know a loved one's tiredness is not a sign of ending. But the body reacts before the mind can explain. Because this fear is not about the present. It is a memory of every moment they once felt unimportant, forgotten, left behind. In this chapter, the first truth becomes clear. People fear abandonment not because they are weak, but because somewhere in their history, someone important once disappeared emotionally or physically, and the echo never fully faded. The fear of being abandoned rarely begins in adulthood. Its roots reach further back into early moments a person may no longer remember clearly, but their body never truly forgot. Sometimes it begins in childhood, in a home where love felt uncertain, not always because of cruelty, sometimes because a parent was overwhelmed, distracted, or emotionally unavailable. Sometimes because affection came in waves, warm one day, distant the next. A child does not understand inconsistency. They only feel it. And in that feeling, their nervous system begins to prepare for loss. Other times, the origin is more sudden, a divorce, a caregiver who leaves, a person who was supposed to stay but couldn't. Moments that seemed simple to adults, changing houses, shifting routines, long absences, can feel enormous to a young mind that depends completely on connection. Even small experiences can plant a deep seed. A child who learns to be good so they won't be left out. A a child who becomes quiet to keep the peace, a child who watches a parent walk away after an argument and wonders if they will return. These moments teach one lesson again and again. Love can disappear, and when it does, it must be your fault. As these early impressions settle, they form templates, unseen patterns that guide the emotional world of an adult without their awareness. What once was a child's survival strategy becomes an adult's quiet fear. And because the origins often feel blurry or unspoken, the person grows up thinking their reactions are strange or too much. But the truth is simpler and softer. They learn to fear abandonment because at some point they experienced connection as fragile. Their mind shaped itself around uncertainty. Their heart learned to brace for loss, not out of weakness, but out of a deep need to stay safe. In this chapter, the roots are uncovered not to assign blame, but to understand how early emotional landscapes shape adult fears. The fear of abandonment is not only emotional, it is biological. It lives inside the nervous system long after the mind tries to move on, because the body remembers patterns of safety and danger even when the conscious mind forgets. Attachment theory explains this gently. From the beginning of life, the brain studies how caregivers respond. If comfort is reliable, the brain learns ease. If comfort is unpredictable, the brain learns alertness. And if comfort disappears when it's needed most, the brain learns to fear closeness and loss at the same time. This fear becomes wired into the body through repetition. When someone has lived through emotional uncertainty, their system becomes watchful. It reacts quickly. It reacts quickly. A delayed message, a shift in tone, a moment of silence, these become signals interpreted as danger even when no danger exists. The logical mind may say, nothing is wrong. But the emotional brain does not speak logic. It speaks memory. It speaks history. It reacts to echoes, not facts. For people with an anxious attachment style, this reaction is especially strong. Their bodies move into hypervigilance. The sympathetic nervous system activates heart racing, breath tightening, thoughts spinning. It is the same system that once warned a child, stay alert, something might change, someone you need might leave. This is why reassurance never feels like enough. Why calm words fade so quickly. Why the fear returns even after everything seems okay. Because the nervous system is protecting an old wound, not responding to the present moment. Understanding this does not make the fear disappear, but it softens the shame around it. It shows that abandonment fear is not a flaw in character. It is a response shaped by survival, shaped by experience, shaped by a brain that once learned the world through uncertainty. In this chapter, psychology becomes a mirror, showing that the fear is not imagined, but rooted in the deepest layers of how a person learns to love and feel safe. Inside someone who fears abandonment, there is a quiet conflict that never fully rests. A longing pulls them toward closeness, yet a deeper instinct keeps them braced for loss. It is a confusing place to live, wanting connection more than anything, while also preparing for the moment it might disappear. This inner struggle often shows up in subtle ways. They may check in often, not because they want control, but because they fear change. They may think too much about tiny details, tone, timing, silence, because each detail feels like a clue. And when someone pulls away even slightly, their mind fills the empty space with imagined endings. Yet at the same time, they resist leaning too far in. They hold back pieces of themselves. They question their own worth. They wonder whether they are too much or too needy or somehow difficult to love. The fear of loss becomes the lens through which they see everything, even moments, meant to bring comfort. This tension creates behaviors they don't fully understand. Sometimes they cling. Sometimes they withdraw. Sometimes they test the relationship without meaning to asking for reassurance, then feeling guilty for needing it. Sometimes they push people away first, hoping to soften the sting of being left later. It is not manipulation, it is protection, a shield built long before they had the words to describe it. The hardest part is the emotional exhaustion. Loving becomes a cycle of hope and fear. Opening up feels dangerous. Staying guarded feels lonely. Every relationship becomes a place where both desire and dread exist side by side. And deep beneath all of this lies one quiet truth. They do not fear love itself. They fear the moment love disappears. The moment the door closes. The moment they are left standing alone again, just as they once were. In this chapter, the emotional contradictions become visible, showing how the fear of being abandoned shapes every corner of a person's inner world. There comes a moment, often quiet, often unexpected, when a person begins to notice the pattern instead of simply living inside it. Not a sudden awakening, but a soft recognition. A feeling of, this fear has been here for a long time, maybe longer than the people in my life now. This awareness usually begins during a pause. A moment when the emotional storm settles just enough for clarity to enter. They notice how their mind jumps to the worst case scenario. They notice how fear rises before evidence appears. They notice that the intensity inside does not match the reality outside. And for the first time, the thought surfaces. This reaction belongs to another time in my life, not to this moment. This realization is not dramatic. It does not erase the fear, but it shifts the emotional landscape. It separates the past from the present, even if only slightly. The person begins to see the younger version of themselves still living inside their reactions, the child who waited for someone to return, the teenager who felt invisible, the adult who learned to expect loss. The fear makes sense in their history, even if it feels overwhelming in their current life. With awareness comes relief and sometimes sadness. Relief that they are not overreacting for no reason. Sadness that they carried this fear alone for so long. But something else appears too, something gentle, a softer way of viewing themselves. A sense of compassion for the parts that learn to survive by expecting disappointment. This is the turning point. Not the removal of fear, but the recognition that the fear is a memory trying to protect them. It becomes possible to question the story the mind tells. Possible to slow down. Possible, even briefly, to breathe through the panic instead of obeying it. In this chapter, awareness becomes a quiet light, showing that understanding does not fix everything, but it opens the door to a kinder way of being. Healing from the fear of being abandoned does not arrive in one moment. It comes slowly, often unnoticed at first. not as a sudden burst of confidence, but as small shifts inside the body, subtle signs that safety is beginning to take root. It begins when a person starts to trust their own feelings without assuming the worst, when a pause in a conversation no longer feels like a warning, when silence does not automatically mean loss. These moments are small, but they mark profound change. The nervous system, once always on alert, learns to settle even when uncertainty appears. Safe connection plays a quiet role in this process. Not perfect people, not flawless relationships, just moments of steadiness. A friend who stays consistent. A partner who listens without anger. Someone who shows up again and again, until the body slowly learns that closeness does not always lead to disappearance. And inside the person, something softens. They begin to notice the difference between fear and reality. They notice when their mind jumps ahead of the moment. They notice the old stories resurfacing, and instead of collapsing into them, they pause. This pause is everything. It is the space where healing lives. Over time, the inner landscape changes shape. Reassurance begins to last longer. Self-blame grows quieter. The urge to panic fades more quickly. The need for constant proof becomes less intense. The fear does not vanish. It simply loses its power. It becomes one voice among many, instead of the only voice in the room. And slowly, connection becomes safer. Not because the world changes, but because the person does. Because they learn that love can be steady, even if imperfect. Because they learn that they are not at the edge of being abandoned, they are at the beginning of understanding themselves. In this chapter, healing is not a destination, but a gentle unfolding. A slow return to trust. A growing sense that being loved does not come with the threat of being left behind. In the end, the fear of being abandoned rarely disappears completely. It lingers like a faint echo, quiet, familiar, softened by time. But it no longer leads every thought. It no longer decides the meaning of every silence. Instead, it becomes something a person can recognize without surrendering to it. A part of their story, not the whole of it. They begin to see that love was never meant to be proven through constant vigilance. It was meant to be felt, slowly and steadily, in the small moments that stay, the gentle conversations, the familiar routines, the people who choose them again, even after hard days. And maybe the most healing realization is this: the fear of being abandoned grew from old wounds, but the ability to feel safe grows from new experiences, from the simple truth that not everyone leaves. Not every silence is a threat. Not every distance is a goodbye. With time, the heart learns to breathe differently. The nervous system, once tight with anticipation, relaxes into something quieter, something almost peaceful. The fear may still whisper, but its voice becomes softer, less urgent, more human. And in that quiet, a new understanding forms. The person they feared losing most was themselves. And now, slowly, patiently, they are learning to stay.